Hi, and welcome to Surprise by Joy. I'm Rustin Comer, and this is Danielle Jones, and we're a part of the pastoral team here at Wayzata Community Church. We're so glad you're joining us for this series on Surprise by Joy, and today we're starting the 4th chapter. We're super excited to be wrapping up this book and having the opportunity to do this with you as we look at where we can find joy in the letter to the church in Philippi. Paul wrote this letter from jail and was able to encourage the church in Philippi in the midst of their own struggles to find ways to find joy in the midst of difficulty. And we thought, what better time than time of quarantine to dive deep into this letter and to engage what joy might look like in this moment. So, Thank you for being here with us. And we're going to read chapter 4, but before we do, let's just do a little intro to chapter 4 and really back to remind us who Paul is and what Paul is doing in terms of writing these letters to the churches.
Yeah.
So as we've said multiple times before, it was under fairly extreme circumstances that Paul was writing this letter to the Philippians, a congregation of friends with whom he had a very long partnership in the work of the gospel, come together to culminate who's receiving this letter. At the time he wrote this letter, Paul was in prison, awaiting trial by the Romans, with likely his outcome going to be death, really for saying things that challenged the empire and the legitimacy of leadership within the empire. It turns out that these church friends of Paul had sent one of their parishioners a long way to visit him in prison and deliver a gift, most likely financial, from the congregation. But the visitor also brought news of some disagreements between two key leaders in the church. And this is where we get their names in this part of the letter. So it originally began as a simple thank you note from Paul to the Philippians church. Instead, turned into this teaching moment, which all the Paul's letters do, right? He starts with, hey, how are you? Ends with, I really care for you, and Jesus does too. And then he smashes people in the middle part of it.
He doesn't smash them.
He doesn't. He actually likes them a lot.
Yeah, he's trying to help them live wholly for God.
Right, as opposed to Corinth. He was pretty rough on Corinth.
Right. Well,
he
had good reason, maybe.
Right?
Yeah.
So Paul uses this as a teaching moment with a detailed exposition and exhortation of how to be a Christian community. What does it mean to follow in the way of Jesus in the life of community, particularly in conflict situations? How do we do this when there is conflict among us?
Which there always is. If you get more than one person in a room, there's going to be conflict in time.
Totally.
Yes.
And so if you've studied Paul's writings, then you already know that there was really no way we should have expected that Paul would just send a short and simple note, because he doesn't do that. They're pretty complex, and he uses this, what we call a sandwich method of the letter. So the first layer, opening sentences, is like a piece of bread full of softness and positivity. And then the second layer is the meat, right? Where he's laying down what really matters, getting down to the point, and then even packing a punch with his flavorful comments. He's the mustard of this.
Oh, I was going to say horseradish.
Or horseradish. I like that too.
Yeah.
Definitely not mayonnaise.
Right.
Then the final layer of the closing sentences, once again, is soft and encouraging. And to this day, right, it's still one of the most effective methods of getting your point across is to,
soften it up a little bit around the edges.
Mention the positive first.
Absolutely.
So that's where we come to chapter 4, is really the end of the mustard, moving into the bread, where he's saying goodbye and wrapping up the letter and kind of creating a synopsis of what he's been saying and how to live this out. So as we jump into chapter 4, that's the kind of context that we have as we come to this letter. So you want to start, or you want me to start?
I'll start, but the names are really interesting. So,
and we really don't know the correct pronunciation, and nor actually do I think either one of us care.
I guess if we would have cared, we would have looked it up ahead of time. So you can email us and let us know if you know that we're saying it wrong. But this time, I'll read these.
And we won't care about those emails either, to be honest, because, honestly, right? That I think this is one of the places...
I will care. For us to find care
I think this is one of the places where we get trapped in Bible reading, right? Is people are afraid to read Bible in public, and they're afraid because there's all these words and names.
Yep.
And the names really don't matter.
Right.
Right? They might matter to Eurodia now that she's dead, or he's dead. Well, I don't even know if it's she or he, but it's a she, I think.
I think they're both she's.
I think they are she's.
Yeah.
But in the midst of that, right, like, nobody cares. Let's just get to the point of what Paul is trying to say and not worry about whether we pronounce. That's a funny word to mispronounce.
It's good I'm starting. I think it's good I'm starting.
My tongue's a little tied this morning.
Gosh.
So join us as we read chapter 4. If you don't have a Bible, you should go buy one off Amazon. Or
download the app for free.
Or download the app for free.
Yeah.
Or just read at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah.
Because it'll be there.
Okay, good. All right. So, my dear, dear friends, I love you so much. I do want the very best for you. You make me feel such joy. Fill me with such pride. Don't waver. Stay on track, steady in God. I urge Euodia and Syntyche to iron out their differences and make up. God doesn't want his children holding grudges. And oh yes, this is the one I really don't know. Syzygus, I'm going to say.
Love it, Syzygus.
Yes, since you're right there to help them work things out, do your best with them. These women worked for the message hand in hand with Clement and me, and with the other veterans. Worked as hard as any of us. Remember, their names are also in the book of life. So celebrate God all day, every day. I mean, revel in him. Make it as clear as you can to all you meet that you're on their side, working with them and not against them. Help them see that the master is about to arrive. He could show up any minute.
Don't fret or worry. Instead of worrying, pray. Let petitions and praises shape your worries into prayers, letting God know your concerns. Before you know it, a sense of God's wholeness, everything coming together for good, will come and settle you down. It's wonderful what happens when Christ displaces worry at the center of your life. Summing it up, friends, I'd say do your best by filling your minds and meditating on things true, noble, reputable, authentic, compelling, gracious, the best. Not the worst, the beautiful, not the ugly. Things to praise, not things to curse. Put into practice what you learned from me, what you heard and saw and realized. Do that, and God, who makes everything work together, will work you into the most excellent harmonies.
I'm glad in God, far happier than you would ever guess. Happy that you're again showing such strong concern for me. Not that you ever quit praying and thinking about me. You just had no chance to show it. Actually, I don't have a sense of needing anything personally. I've learned by now to be quite content whatever my circumstances. I'm just as happy with little as with much as with little. I've found the recipe for being happy, whether full or hungry, hands full or hands empty. Whatever I have, wherever I am, I can make it through anything in the one who makes me who I am. I don't mean that your help didn't mean a lot to me. It did. It was a beautiful thing that you came alongside me in my troubles.
You Philippians well know, and you can be sure that I'll never forget it, that when I first left the Macedonian province, venturing out with the message, not one church helped out in the give and take of this work except you. You were the only one. Even while I was in Thessalonica, you helped out, and not only once, but twice. Not that I'm looking for handouts, but I do want you to experience the blessing that issues from generosity. And now I have it all, and keep getting more. The gifts you sent with Epaphroditus were more than enough, like a sweet-smelling sacrifice, roasting on the altar, filling the air with fragrance, pleasing God to no end. You can be sure that God will take care of everything you need, his generosity exceeding even yours in the glory that pours from Jesus. Our God and Father abounds in glory that just pours out into eternity. Yes, give our regards to every follower of Jesus you meet. Our friends here say hello. All the Christians here, especially the believers who work in the place of Caesar, want to be remembered to you. Receive and experience the amazing grace of our Master Jesus Christ deep, deep within yourselves. Peace out.
Yeah.
So, as we read through this kind of closing section of the letter, what are some things that strike you at the close of this letter?
Well, I mean, certainly it's interesting that Paul is calling out this conflict that's happening between Euodia and Syntyche, and that he is also asking someone else to kind of help them work it out. And so, I think when I think about the beginning of the letter, as we've talked about, this call to community, this call to unity, Paul is getting specific now, and he's saying, okay, don't think this doesn't apply to you. I almost feel like, this is one of the conflicts.
You're the reason I'm writing the letter.
Right.
Right. In case you weren't sure,
yes.
You're the problem.
And I think about, as he talks about how these women have been laboring or had labored with him in the past, had continued. I mean, I do think it's interesting the conflicts that come up in leadership and in community, and what does it look like to resolve those? And so then I think Paul gets pretty specific, and I think part of what he says is celebrating God all day and doing that in specific ways is one of the things, I think, that's going to help you live at peace with others.
Yeah.
Because you'll stay focused on what matters most.
Totally. I do think it kind of harkens back to that first chapter where he talks about that it is, or second chapter where he talks about unity is the point, and remembering what you're unified around matters.
It's almost as if, and this makes sense to me, this gospel message is not going to get out there if we are not modeling it and living it, in a unified way. And I think we all know that. I mean, we hear that. That's a common thing. Mm-hmm. But again and again, it is sort of what's most important, to find ways to come together.
When you think about if, as you talk about the gospel, right? Like, the good news, which is the gospel, like, what if the church was known as the place where you go to get good news, right? Not the place, but the people. Like, if you needed good news for your life, you knew where to get it on your neighborhood street.
Yeah.
Right? That would be such a, of all the things that we're known for around the world, that's not really one of them.
But it's supposed to be, right? I mean,
it's
if you look
at the heart of what Paul says.
And it's at the heart of what Christ did. I mean, I think this is the carrying on of the work that began. So that is very convicting, right? When I was in seminary, my favorite preaching professor would say, when we were writing sermons, she would say, the last thing you should leave people with is the good news. So when you're writing a sermon, you should be saying to yourself, where is the good news in this?
Totally.
And that continues to shape my messages today.
Yeah. No, I love that. So for me, I think two of the things that kind of struck me, one of them you already mentioned, this, how did you pronounce?
Syzygus.
Yeah. I think it's right. Like, we've already kind of heard a little bit of Euodia and Syntyche, or whatever you say her name is. Like, he's already kind of briefly mentioned the conflict of them earlier.
Yeah.
And here he names them, but then he pulls out this other name of a person who's just really his or her sole purpose in this part of the letter is to help them work things out.
Yeah.
And I do think that often in places of conflict, we need help working that out.
Yes.
I think it's a really important thing that we see embodied in this letter. There's so much, even my conflict in myself, and that's why I go to therapy, right? There's so much conflict even in myself that I can't work on my own.
Yeah.
That I need another voice helping me hear my own crazy.
But it's funny, isn't it, how there is a lot of shame in our culture around that. I mean, we really have been sold a bill of goods that we can take care of ourselves, that we should be able to do it alone, that, if we aren't able to do it alone, there's something wrong with us.
Right.
Instead of naming this as a normal part of relationship.
Yeah.
That things break and then they get put back together, and then they break again and then they get put back together. And
you can't always put them back together yourself. Sometimes you need another person to help it.
And once in a while, you can't put it back together either.
That's so true.
And so knowing that, I think, because I do think as Christians and Christian circles, we think, we either, I think, get too far into conflict, thinking we're doing something holy by stirring up conflict and making people mad, but that's on them because that's about the gospel, not me. Or we go to the other side where we think, well, I should never be upset with anyone. And I think, again, that middle ground is what we need to cultivate.
Yeah.
Healthy conflict that leads us deeper in relationship.
Yeah.
And bringing the good news.
I was just reading the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. I can't remember who wrote that. It's fantastic.
How
book.
many did we have?
You think
You're
I'm
not gonna
answering
say.
that on a screen? There's no way.
6. The answer was 6.
But part of what that book says is like one of the dysfunctions of team is that we avoid conflict at all costs.
Yeah.
And he makes a really important point that like conflict should be about the thing, not the person. Healthy conflict is always about what's the thing out here that we're trying to resolve and fix.
Yeah.
Not that I don't like the way that Danielle is trying to fix it.
Right.
Right. So what is it we're trying to deal with? And then if your team can wrap around that and know that there's a safe place to do that. And part of what he talks about is the only way to get there is through leadership vulnerability. Which I think is fascinating, right? Like it's only when we as leaders are vulnerable that people feel comfortable enough to address these things.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important place, and I think that's part of what Paul's doing here is, Paul is all throughout the letter coming back to his own journey
Yeah.
in the way of Christ and saying, hey, I don't have it all figured out,
Yeah.
but here's what I do have figured out, and challenging them, say, what do you have figured out?
Yeah.
And what do you not have figured out? But here's a place where there's problems, and there's enough problems that the news is coming to me as I'm a distance from you.
Yes.
So when the world's talking, they're not talking about your good news. They're talking about the silly fighting that's going on in the church.
Yes.
And he's challenging them against that.
Yeah.
And I think that's, I think sometimes we have to listen to what the culture hears about the church and address that instead of thinking we understand who the church is.
Yeah. Right, because once you're in,
You don't see it, you don't hear it.
yeah, it's true.
Right? It's like, we've all had these friends, couples in our life where they come to a party and all they do through the whole party is fight, and they don't even hear themselves fighting anymore
Right.
because it's just such a normal part. And as soon as they leave, everybody in the party is like,
Whoa.
holy moly.
Are you worried about them? I
Right.
think I'm worried about them.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's exactly what's happening here in the church. And
Yeah.
and sometimes we just need people to say, like a good friend, like, do you know you fought through our whole party?
Right.
Like, I love you, but did you know that?
Did you notice that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So and the other thing I really love is, there's this, it's that passage that I had memorized growing up, that God works everything out for the good of those who love him.
Yeah.
But
Without any work on our part. I think it's how we memorize that. We're like, that's great. You're on it, God. I don't have to do anything now.
yeah, which is like verse 9 of this chapter 4. But I love how Eugene Peterson translated it, that God who makes, so if you do these things, do those things that I already said, and then God who makes everything work together, right? So God is at work bringing order out of chaos,
Yeah.
like he was from the very beginning, will work you into his most excellent harmonies. So we'll work the church into this harmonic. I love that phrasing.
Yeah.
That there's dissonance in community.
Yeah.
And part of what God is doing as he's creating order is he's creating harmonies out of our dissonance.
Yeah.
I just think it's such a beautiful, because there's a lot of times in life where I feel dissonant, right? I feel
Yeah.
dissonant with others. I feel dissonant with myself. I feel dissonant, like the world around me is dissonant.
Mm-hmm.
And so having these moments where I know that even if I'm sowing dissonance, God's at work sowing harmony. Now I should also be at work sowing harmony. But
Well, and it is interesting that God is the one doing the work. So I don't need to fight for my place in the organization or in the community, that God is working a space for me. And, that God will work you into his most excellent harmonies. It reminded me, too, of baking or something. When you're working something into dough, or you're working something into a recipe, you're trying to get it all mixed in, and it takes a while, and it takes some effort, and it takes some, kind of gelling.
we did this. So when I was in LA, we had a synagogue that worshipped in our space, Makom or Shalom, Place for the Light of Peace, which I love that name. So Makom or Shalom, as they would do their yearly Yom Kippur services, would start their service by the entire gathered group, which could be hundreds, holding hands and chanting Shalom. And they wouldn't start the service until the dissonance of their Shalom became harmonic.
Oh
And
my
so
gosh, cool.
It was crazy. Like
Till the voices blended.
Till all the voices blended and their Shalom became a harmonic Shalom. Right?
That is beautiful.
And it's just, for me, that's the beauty of this. Like, so it says, if you do this, God is doing this, but it takes each person doing their work.
Yeah.
right?
Putting into practice.
Like, and hearing, right? Part of what happens is by the fourth or fifth time you chant shalom, you're hearing what your neighbors are doing, and your voice will begin to blend with theirs. But you have to listen. If you shut off, if we only want our way, we'll never get to the point of harmonic realities.
So true.
And I think that, like, if I were to say anything is at the core of what he's calling them to, it is this harmonic good news that he's calling them to open themselves into as a community through this letter.
We're pretty far from that as the church right now.
Yeah, especially when you think about the global church, right? Like,
yes, the church
mainline,
universal,
Catholic, evangelical,
yeah,
all of those worlds. We have a pretty dissonant voice within our neighborhoods.
Yeah. So
Big
true.
Stuff.
Yes.
So, secondly, Daniel, this is a letter, and I love letter writing. I used to write about 50 to 100 letters a week.
What? When you were in prison? How did you have time for that?
That's how I started every Monday. That was my
your
Monday
day?
practice.
Wow.
So I would, within about a month and a half, I would write everybody in the congregation, and just write a prayer, and it wasn't all long. I mean, sometimes it was just like a postcard kind of size.
Yeah.
But it was just something that grounded me that was a prayer practice for me, because we've talked about before, like, prayer is a difficult thing for me.
Yeah.
And so it was a way that I can intentionally pray for each person. But I've gotten away from that, to be honest with you. So have you ever received, what's the most important letter you ever received?
Yeah, I think it was hands down when I was living in LA, and Brian and I, my husband, were dating long distance. We dated long distance the whole time. And he sent me, and we were kind of in that awkward phase of like, where are we at in this whole thing? Like, are we doing this? Are we not doing it? He lived on the East Coast, I lived on the West Coast. And so I got this letter from him, and in it was, he had made 2 CDs. Remember when people did that? They'd make CDs.
I used to do that too.
And he had like crafted even a whole case for it, and a sort of the reasoning behind every song. And I opened this package, and I was with a friend of mine, and he was like, oh, he's in love with you. That's what this friend said. And I was like, oh my gosh, I think, so it was sort of this.
Did you say, I think I might be in love with him too?
I was just like, well, what are we doing? I would always go to the pragmatic of like, how is this going to work? We live in different places. It's never going to work. But that was a transformational letter for sure. Because it was sort of this like, okay, something different's happening. And I knew that, but then it was proof. It was paper proof.
I love that story.
It was cool. I still have it. Yeah.
That's awesome.
I should bring it in. Yeah, I should dig that out again, actually.
Do you have a CD player? I don't even think I have a CD player.
Well, I couldn't play it, but I could make the list. I could look at what he wrote, though.
And that's a rejoicing, right?
Yeah.
To go back to pull another piece. Like,
Yeah.
sometimes in our marriages, we need to go back to those letters we wrote or received in the early days.
Maybe I should show it to him. Be like, this is how you felt about me. Now that we've been locked down for 55 days, maybe you're questioning that.
Or, yeah.
No, I'm
Maybe
kidding.
you should let it feed you instead of...
True.
It's so funny, because on the other side, right, I've written all these letters, and my sister, who I love dearly, her name's Ray, and I don't remember writing this letter, right? Like, I have literally no recollection. But one time I was with her, and she uncovered this letter that I had written to her when I was in undergraduate theology school. And was like in my super conservative space and trying to talk to her about why divorce was wrong, even though, her husband was not a good human to her. And she kept this letter, right? And so and all I wanted to do once I saw that she had it is I wanted to throw it away. Because I was like, that's not what I believe now, right?
Yeah.
That's a picture of the old me.
Yeah.
And it's painful, and it's not good news, and it's not like it was written very compassionately, but it was such the wrong way of how I want to be in faith.
Yeah.
And so that's one letter that I remember that I've sent that was like, man, I really wish I could go back and change that. And then, just this last week, I received a letter from a friend in California who, in their letter, just told me what they're learning during COVID.
Oh, cool.
And I was like, how cool is that, right? To know that like other people are processing how to appropriate these moments and the things that he had learned and the things that he's learning in this moment. It was just really a cool letter.
And you just wrote letters to Heather and your kids, and that was on your blog. You can check Rustin's blog. That's super sweet. No, really though, that took intention and
well, and it came out of truthfully, it came out of this. It's like, as part of the action steps for me is like we can think about, as we'll talk about. It says think about what's good, what's you can when you're locked up with somebody, like in quarantine, you can think about all the bad things.
Yeah.
And you can circle on those. And where that's going to take you is to a worse place.
Well, did we talk about this already, that in Wuhan, China, there are more people have filed for divorce than they ever do in this time of year in the past years. And actually the government stopped. I don't know if this is true. Somebody could fact check this. But somebody said the government just all of a sudden, like somebody's going to write and be like, this is what I heard though, that they stopped. They just said we need to wait a couple months because you need to think about this. Well, and because they wanted people to really think about if that's what they wanted to do. And you're right, you can focus on the worst, hardest things. And I actually think that's how conflict arises, to sort of circle back full circle. I think that when we focus on when we get too closely in and don't keep the bigger picture in mind, we can really get upset with someone.
Totally. Yeah. And so for me, it was a practice of like, this is what I love about these people, right? Like these are my people. This is what I love about them. And I wouldn't allow myself, I didn't talk about all this in my blog, but I would only allow myself 5 minutes for each person.
Really?
So it was the top 20 things that came in my mind in the first 5 minutes. Because I was like, if I can't think about these things quickly, then I need to do work. But they all just popped off, right? Of things that I really care and love about each of these people.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was fun.
That's so good.
Yeah. So I guess for today, kind of our challenge for you, instead of an adventure question, we're going to offer you an adventure challenge, is write a letter to someone you care deeply for and share what's on your heart.
Let me tell you this too. It's so funny you say this. So years ago at another church that I was at, we did a whole weekend retreat on letter writing. And it was using this curriculum called Leave Nothing Unsaid by Jody Noland, I think is her last name. She has offered all that material for free. And essentially what she says is people often wait to the end of their life to write these letters, some of which can't do it by then, don't have time, all these other things. So she says, write the letters now. So if you need some material to help you write letters, you can look up Leave Nothing Unsaid.
Leave Nothing Unsaid by Jody
Noland, N-O-L-N, and she's put it all online for free.
Yeah, so we think that's a good practice. Write a letter this week to somebody you care deeply and share what's on your heart.
Yeah, absolutely. We should do it too, probably.
Yeah. Does mine already count? No, I gotta do more. That's fine.
Yeah.
I can do more.
Right. Yeah.
Okay,
It'll be good for you.
It's always good.
And others.
So, do you have a stop and start for this week? For this day?
We'll probably stop putting off writing those letters and start writing them this week, since we just made that commitment.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've actually been writing a lot of notes and cards in quarantine.
You do that a lot.
I do. I like doing it. It's good. You did.
It was so sweet.
I was hoping you'd bring that up. I'm just kidding.
No, it was so sweet.
Wow. I think I'm trying to sort of put what I'm thinking out there instead of just thinking it. I don't believe in it's the thought that counts. I really don't. I believe it's the action that counts. So
when he says this, as we dig into this chapter 4, that it like actions matter. Do the actions. Yes. God will do what God's doing, but you got to do what you have to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Amen. What are you going to do?
I'm going to look for spaces. I'm going to stop the dissonance and look for ways to create more harmonic. So for me, it's about listening, right? Like, because I think God's the one who blends the harmonies, but it's my work, right? I got to hit my notes so that those around me can hit their notes. So
it's your practice, as Paul would call it, right?
Yeah.
He says you got to practice it.
Got to practice. Yep. So I'm going to practice hitting the right notes so other people can be harmonious with me and me with them.
Nice. I think that's great.
Awesome. Well, as we start this chapter 4, may you find harmony in your own relationships. And may you find the places where there are conflict and begin to work those things out. And may you receive the good news that God loves you more than anything in this world. So go in peace.